Hello, and thank you for joining me. Today, we're returning to Fallout 76, where we're going to spend another 1,000 scrip with the Purveyor on 3-star ranged legendary weapons, and as always, I'll take a few moments to talk about each one, about what makes it good, bad, or mediocre. So let's see what the Purveyor has for us today. And for our first roll, we got an Aristocrat's Plasma Caster, with bashing damage increased by 50% and 15% faster reload. So this was almost a really good roll. We got the Aristocrat's effect is one of the, probably in my opinion, the best of the first stars for full health builds, because the only drawback to get an extra plus 50% damage is that you have to have 32,000 caps on your character at all times. That may sound like a lot to some newer players, but once you get to be high level and you've bought most of the things that you care about from the robot vendors, and you're not typically seeing plans or anything else that you really care about on most player vendors, it's really not that hard to keep 32,000. In fact, it can sometimes be difficult to keep yourself below 40,000. So, that's actually a very powerful effect right there. Bashing damage increased by 50% is kind of what ruins this weapon. It's not totally ruined. It's still a solid roll. It's just that the second star could be so much better. The bashing damage in this game is very low, basically useless in my opinion. The big exception to that is if you're running the minigun and you put the shredder mod on it. In that situation, if you're using it as a melee weapon, then the bashing damage increased by 50% is actually very powerful and makes the weapon very good. But this is not a minigun with no shredder mod, so that's not happening here. The 15% faster reload, I used to think that was actually one of the best third stars, but it was brought to my attention by one of my viewers that if you have the speed demon mutation, then that is not really doing a whole lot for you. It's not nothing, but it's more or less negligible. So I think most players, at least late game players, will have the speed demon mutation unless you're doing some sort of a challenge run or a role-playing build or something like that. But if you're just, trying to make a powerful character and go have fun with the endgame content, then you're probably going to have Speed Demon just because it's fun to run faster. And as a side benefit, you reload your weapons faster, which is a great thing. So overall, unfortunately, that third star isn't doing nearly as much as it could be. Of course, if you don't have the Speed Demon mutation, then that is a very good third star. But unfortunately, this is the Plasma Caster. I'm actually doing the video on my Heavy Gunner this week, so he happens to know the plan for the Plasma Caster, and I like the weapon, but it's not tradable, so unfortunately he won't be putting this one to use, so it's just going to end up going back to Murmur in the script box. So let's see what else we can get. And here we've got another untradeable weapon. We got a Medic's Gauss shotgun with the plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So my heavy gunner here is actually a dual spec character thanks to perk loadouts. He specs in both power armor heavy guns and in shotguns, and his primary weapon when he's running around as a shotgunner is the Gauss shotgun, although he uses a vampires because he basically just runs around like an idiot when he's doing that, runs straight into enemies and just shoots things to stay alive. It's a lot of fun. It's a great play style that I highly recommend you play around with at some point. But this is not really the kind of Gauss shotgun I would want for it. It's not terrible. I do use VATS primarily in that character's build when I'm using his shotguns, so there's nothing wrong with that, but the vampire's effect is so powerful on shotguns because every time you shoot an enemy, if all 8 of your pellets hit, then you are getting 8 times the healing benefit. So if you're a bloodied build, like my characters typically are, then it's almost completely healing how much health you actually have available to heal every shot. So it's just great. But the Medic's effect, although it does heal your teammates, I think that it's just not going to be nearly as effective. I guess I could play around with that one of these days. It could be very good for a support build, and if at some point in the future that Bethesda were to release some content where we really needed some support builds to make some of the tougher fights more manageable, then a weapon like this and a build like that could actually be very good. but there's just not really a lot of call for that. You can, with the right build and the right gear, you can actually solo pretty much all of the endgame content, so needing a support character is just sadly not a requirement in this game. So the Medic's effect is really kind of losing out a lot because of that more than anything else, in my opinion. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, that's a great effect. That's probably exactly the second star I want on a Gauss shotgun, since the Gauss shotguns are already explosive, so you're not going to get any extra damage there. The plus 50% VATS critical damage would be fine, but honestly, I find that even just my Vampire's Gauss shotgun in Bloodied with my shotgunner is one-shotting most things in the torso without even using crits. So it would just kind of be pointless. I would rather just get some extra VATS accuracy so that I almost always hit my targets. The plus 50% or plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, that unfortunately does not synergize well with the second star at all, because you're either using VATS or you are aiming down the sights. Now, this is definitely not the kind of weapon that I would normally aim down the sights, but if you're the type of player who would, then getting 50 damage resistance for doing just that is not a bad deal, although it's also not doing a whole lot for you unless your armor is a bit lacking, because once you hit 300 to 400 damage resistance, somewhere in that ballpark, you are going to start seeing diminishing returns. It's not like you'll see no benefit from it at all. You will, but it just will be a lot less than like if you had 0 damage resistance. Going from 0 to 50 is a big difference. Going from, say, 350 to 400, much, much less. So as far as how much damage will get through your armor. That said, it's, again, not a bad thing if you're the type of player who's going to be aiming this thing down the sights anyway. Unfortunately, it does not give any protection to energy or poison or fire or anything like that. I feel like that's kind of lacking. I feel like that third star should really affect basically all incoming damage, not just ballistic damage, but, you know, I didn't design the legendary effects, so overall, this one's going to also be destined for the Scrip box, so let's see what else we can get. And here we've got an Assassin's 50 cal machine gun, with the last round in the magazine having a 25% chance to deal double damage, and +1 perception. And this one would actually be kind of interesting as a PvP weapon, potentially. Now, I don't know enough about PvP to know if the 50 cal is even at all slightly viable there. My suspicion is it's probably not, but I don't know. You know, if you're a big PvP player, feel free to chime in the comments and let me know. But my guess is it's definitely not meta at the very least. So not great there, but, you know, could have still been fun to, you know, go around and attack your friends or something with it. But the second star, unfortunately, and that's the primary benefit of the Assassin's effect, is PvP. Most of the human NPCs in this game are already pretty squishy. You don't really even need much of a legendary effect at all to put most of them down. You can usually put them down pretty quickly without a legendary weapon, so the Assassin's effect just isn't doing a whole lot in most PvE scenarios. So yeah, and then the second star really makes it kind of worthless even in a PvP scenario, this particular one anyway, because it's basically like having no second star whatsoever. The 50 cal machine gun has a very large magazine, so the chances of actually having that trigger are 1 in several hundred. I can't remember exactly what the base ammo capacity of the 50 cal is, which bugs me because when I'm playing my heavy gunner, this character in heavy gun mode, that's his primary weapon, but, you know, whatever. It's several hundred rounds, at least, between times you'll see that trigger, and that's assuming that you actually run out your magazine. The 50 cal machine gun does have one advantage over things like Gatling plasmas and ultrasight Gatling lasers and things like that, because whereas they need to run their core dry before they reload, or else those players will end up with a whole bunch of half or less filled cores in their inventory, the 50 cal machine gun can be reloaded at any time, and you're not going to end up with a bunch of half 50 cal rounds or anything. So it has that advantage, and so in my experience, I hardly ever actually fire the last round, so I would basically never get a benefit from that at all, ever, with a 50 cal. The +1 perception, it's not terrible. It's actually decent on a lot of weapons, primarily the ones that you would want to use in VATS, because the primary benefit of perception bonus is increased accuracy in VATS. The 50 cal is probably one of the automatic heavy guns that you could use in VATS to some extent, at least if you really wanted to. I do a little bit on my heavy gunner, mostly to take out things like mole rats and some of the flying bugs like the stingwings and things like that, just because they're difficult to free target. I use a controller. I know I'm weird. I play on PC and I use a controller, but I played the Fallout 3 and New Vegas and 4 on my Xbox, so I got used to using the Xbox controller. So that's the way I like to play. And so, yeah, I do use VATS a little bit for that when I'm using my 50 cal, but even that's kind of rare, so I would rather have something much more useful on the 3rd star than perception. 90% reduced weight is always a good one for heavy weapons. Probably the best one, really. But anyway, let's go on ahead and see what else Murmur has for us today. Okay, she's got some genuine crap for us today. We've got an Aristocrat Salvage Assaultron head with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and 90% reduced weight. So the Salvage Assaultron head is probably the buggiest weapon in the game, at least in my personal experience. You can load a whole bunch of fusion cells into it and supposedly get some really high one-shot damage because you empty the clip every single time you fire one shot from it, regardless of how many shots you've loaded into the weapon. So you see some really high damage numbers, and sometimes things will just die instantly when you shoot them with one of these things, and sometimes their health bar will barely move, even though you see that it was clearly a hit with damage numbers that are sky high, and you never know exactly what's going to happen. It would be really interesting if they fixed it to where that actually was somewhat reliable, even if it wasn't always sky high damage numbers. You know, if it was at least reliable, it could be potentially fun to play around with on occasion. I don't see it being anybody's daily farming weapon, but, you know, I could at least see somebody having some fun with that if it was a little bit more consistent and usable. The VATS critical hit's doing plus 50% damage. I guess if you are using this thing in VATS, which you theoretically could, then getting some extra damage from a critical when you have a whole bunch of rounds loaded into the weapon could prove very powerful if the damage works right. So yeah, you know, again, if the weapon was less buggy, that my opinion on this might be a little bit different, but as it is, I still wouldn't try to run it. And then the 90% reduced weight is most definitely the most valuable part of most valuable star on this weapon, because it means it will take up less space or less weight in my inventory until I get around to dropping it into the Scrip box. So, alright, let's see if Murmur maybe will have something good for us today. So here we've got an Assassin short Gatling gun with plus 50% limb damage and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So we talked about the Assassin's effect before, and I really don't think a Gatling gun is likely to be very meta for PvP either. I think its fire rate is going to be just too slow because the damage that you can do to another player in PvP is capped. I don't remember exactly what it is. I think it's 150, but I could be completely wrong on that. I'm not really a PvP expert by any means. So, but I do know that it's capped, and to really put your enemies down quickly, you are going to need to have a higher fire rate weapon, and I think this weapon's fire rate is just too slow to do much other than just maybe be fun while you're playing around attacking your friends or something. But it's definitely not going to be a game-winning weapon by any means in PvP, and as we talked about earlier, the human NPCs in the game are pretty squishy, so you don't really need a specific weapon, especially a heavy weapon, kept around just to deal with them. The plus 50% limb damage, I think it's basically a lost effect on this particular weapon. It's not the kind of effect that I really like normally anyway, but you could at least get some use out of it potentially from a faster firing, lower damaging weapon, something where you're going to have to put quite a few hits on the target before they actually go down, even for, you know, your typical enemies. This really isn't that weapon. It's not going to be one-shotting every single thing you see typically, unless you've got, you know, a really good build and first star on it or something, but it hits hard, and it's going to put things typically down in 1 to 2 shots, but it fires slowly, so that's its drawback. But back to the 50% limb damage, the faster firing weapons, they might actually have a chance of crippling a limb before they kill the enemy. This thing I don't think will. I think they'll just be dead before you actually manage to cripple anything, unless you're using the perks that let you have a chance of crippling enemies when you hit them, which is the way I would generally recommend trying to cripple your enemies if that's something you want to do. The plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, we talked about that earlier too, although this might be a half-decent weapon for it, because this is definitely the kind of weapon that I would largely aim down the sights, except for maybe when I was attacking, like I say, mole rats or stingwings or things like that are just hard for me to target with the controller. So you could definitely use it in VATS, but when I'm using my heavy guns, I try to use free aim as much as possible, just because it feels more right to me, and it's nice to get a change from VATSing all the time, which is part of the reason I like my heavy gunners. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's just not doing a whole lot for you with that. As we talked about before, it's not really giving a huge benefit if you have decent armor, especially if you're running around in power armor. So, overall, pretty much another dud here. Let's see what else we've got. And here we've got an Executioner short pump-action shotgun with plus 25% damage while aiming and 90% reduced weight. So the Executioner's effect is actually one of the more powerful effects, at least situationally, because unlike the other effects where all of their damage that they talk about, 50% or whatever, is all the base damage of the weapon, the Executioner's effect is still multiplicative, and that means that it's giving you 50% of the damage that you see on the damage card, even when it's been increased by things like perks, chems, mutations, or whatever else you've got that is increasing your damage output. So that's a good thing, with the drawback being that it really does nothing at all until the target is at 39% or less health. So in the right situation, it could be good. One thing I'm actually not sure of is, and I guess all the pellets would theoretically hit at the same time, but depending on how it calculated it, if the first pellet did damage that brought the target's health below 40%, I wonder if the next pellet might do plus 50% damage. I'm not sure how I would test that. I'm probably not going to try, but that's something I'm kind of curious about. The plus 25% damage while aiming, it's a very solid effect. This is the type of weapon that I would use almost exclusively in VATS, so I wouldn't get a whole lot out of it, but if you are the type of player who prefers to aim down the sights as opposed to using VATS for a weapon like this, then it's just 25% extra damage just for playing the way that you like to play, so that's a great thing. And the 90% reduced weight is not necessarily the best third star for a shotgun, considering that they do have a good number of mods, and the mods that you apply to a weapon do not benefit from the 90% reduced weight, so that's a bummer. And so the more mods you have, the more it weighs, and the less that benefit or that effect is worthwhile. But it will always save you at least some amount of weight in your inventory, so that's not a terrible thing. This one's actually interesting enough that I might actually put it on my vendor, especially since with that third star it doesn't really weigh a whole lot. So let's see what else we can get here. And here we've got a Mutant Slayer's Pipe Revolver with 25% faster fire rate and 90% reduced weight. I'm loving that 90% reduced weight, and I'm not complaining. So the Mutant Slayer's effect is probably one of the more useful of the Slayer's effects, just because, for most players anyway, you are going to be fighting super mutants on a regular basis. Most notably, if you are looking to grind out some experience, there's a good chance you're going to be hitting West Tech and murdering the super mutants there. So keeping a weapon around specifically for super mutants is not necessarily the worst idea, since they do tend to be kind of tanky. And with the 90% reduced weight on this weapon, it would make even more sense. And then the Pipe Revolver, it cannot be made fully automatic, which is unfortunate. You'll get the most benefit from the 25% faster fire rate effect on weapons that you can make fully automatic, but I believe it does fire slowly enough that you will feel the benefit from the 25% faster fire rate, so that's a good thing. And then the interesting thing about the Pipe Revolver is it's the only revolver in the game that you can actually put a suppressor on. So if you put a suppressor on it, then you get to go around in stealth, and you can get the extra stealth damage. If you're using VATS, you can get extra damage from targeting the weak points and VATS criticals, so all around, this weapon could actually be pretty good, at least against super mutants. I'd prefer something like Bloodied, Anti-Armor, Aristocrat, something like that for the first star, if I was going to consider it a general use type weapon. But as far as keeping a weapon, gunslinger type player, spec player, keeping a weapon around specifically for dealing with super mutants, this could actually be a pretty solid choice. So because of its lightweight, I may again go on ahead and put this up on my vendor for relatively cheap and see if anybody has any interest in it. So let's go on ahead and see what else Brimmer has for us. Alright, and here we've got a Gourmand's Missile Launcher with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and breaks 50% slower. So the Gourmand's effect is not one of my favorite effects, mainly because it's only 24% damage bonus, which comes about from having a full thirst and hunger meter. Each one is worth 12%. But unless you're using perfect bubble gum all the time, or tons of gum and popcorn and things like that, and just being super vigilant about making sure your character is well fed and well hydrated, those meters are going to decrease, and your damage is going to decrease because of it. Now, with a missile launcher, that might not be such a big deal because it has such a high base damage to begin with. So, you could do pretty well, at least for, just kind of running around and screwing around a bit, trying to, launch the missiles that end up inevitably in your inventory, like when you launch a nuke or whatever, and having some fun with it that way. But you don't really need even a legendary one to do that effectively. Although if the ideal one would have 90% reduced weight. Kind of ironic that the past several ones have had 90% reduced weight, but of course the one that I would really want it to have it doesn't. It breaks 50% slower, which is a good effect because I don't think anybody really enjoys repairing their gear. So they could probably have left that completely out of the game, and I don't think anybody would have complained about that. But they didn't. It's in the game, so having your weapons break slower is definitely not something to be complaining about. Probably not the best third star, but not horrible. And then the VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage. It's a great effect. I love seeing it on rifles and pistols, and potentially even shotguns, but I would probably use a missile launcher like this primarily by aiming down the sights. Because, and it's not only because of this, but partly because if you miss your shot in VATS, then there's a chance that your missile will just go off into nothingness and you won't get any explosion at all from it, and that's a bummer. And that doesn't happen all the time, at least not to me, but it can happen, and so it's something to be aware of if you decide to use VATS with this, and I would prefer something that didn't really have VATS spec on it. So all around, another dud here. Let's see what else we've got. And here we've got a Stalker's Light Machine Gun with plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So the Stalker's effect is, in my opinion, probably the worst of the first stars, at least for ranged weapons in the game at this point, because in my experience, it does cost the extra AP cost when you're firing it when you're outside of stealth, or, not in combat, when it shows hidden above your head or whatever, but you're not 100% guaranteed to hit. Now, it does tend to hit more often than it would otherwise, I do believe. Like, it's kind of like having a plus 50% VATS hit chance on that one shot, but I've still missed them, so, it says plus 100% VATS accuracy. I would expect to always hit at that point, so it doesn't. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, I just don't think that's very good. Really, the first 2 stars are both VATS focused on, and I don't think this weapon is very good for VATS at all, just because of its super high fire rate. No matter how much AP you manage to build up for your AP pool and how many perks and whatever you've got to keep your AP regen high, and however you mod this thing out to keep its AP cost as low as possible. And even if it had the 25% less VATS AP cost 3rd star, which it doesn't, but even if it did, I just think you're going to burn through your AP pool so quickly with that fire rate that you're going to have to spend most of your time either hip firing or aiming down the sights anyway, so you may as well just spec for that if you're going to use a light machine gun. And the plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, well, that at least synergizes with the ideal playstyle, at least in my opinion, the ideal playstyle for the light machine gun. So that's, I guess, kind of a good thing, although it's not particularly exciting. So let's see what else we've got here. And here we've got a Troubleshooter short gamma gun with plus 50% limb damage and hits having a chance to generate a stealth field. So the Troubleshooter's effect is probably right up there with the Mutant Slayer's effect in utility as far as the Slayer's effects go, just because, once again, there will definitely be times in the game for most players where you will be fighting robots, whether it be a daily op or the encrypted event or, you know, just in the nuke silo when you're launching a nuke. So, and again, robots are not the squishiest enemies in the game, so getting some extra damage against them is never a bad thing. The plus 50% limb damage, again, it's really not the kind of effect I really ever want to see on a weapon. Although I guess you could potentially get a little bit of benefit from it on this weapon, because this weapon does fire fast enough, and its damage is a little bit lower than a lot of others, being a pistol primarily because of that. Excuse me. So you might see some benefit from it, but once again, I really feel like if you want to cripple your enemies, then equip the perks that give you a chance to cripple them on hit. That's just your best way to do it. So, not really doing a whole lot with that 2nd star. And then his having a chance to generate a stealth field. Well, this weapon is basically treated as being suppressed already. So, if you've got a half-decent stealth spec to begin with, then you really don't need that effect on it. You should be able to stay in stealth already while you're using this weapon. Although if you're not really spec'd for stealth, then maybe that 3rd star, because of how quickly it does fire, it's not the super high fire rate or anything like that, but it's definitely a solid fire rate. And it might hit things fast enough to generate enough of a stealth field to allow you to stealth a bit. So overall, I think this one is pretty much on the low end of mediocre or maybe the high end of bad, but yeah, definitely not exciting. I kind of lost track of how many I've done here, so let's just do 2 more and call it a day here. So here we've got the Medic's Hellstorm missile launcher, with the last round in a magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage and faster movement speed while aiming. So the Medic's effect we talked about earlier, and if you are looking to do a support build, I really don't think that the Hellstorm missile launcher is going to be the type of weapon that you are looking to equip your character with. So yeah, not really the 1st star I would want to see on a Hellstorm missile launcher. And then the last round of magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage, I guess you might see benefit from it a little bit more frequently on this weapon than you would a lot of others because of its very low fire rate, or I'm sorry, very low ammo capacity. So I guess there's that, but again, it's not the 2nd star I would want to see on, well, anything at all ever. So honestly, I'm a little bitter about Bethesda even adding that one when they did the legendary effect revamp. That one is just pure crap. And then the faster movement speed while aiming, it's not really doing a whole lot for you if you already have the speed demon mutation, kind of like the faster reload speed that we talked about earlier. So in fact, it's actually not doing anything at all for you if you have the speed demon mutation. And if you don't, even then it's probably not doing a whole lot for you, because I don't think most players are running around the battlefield constantly holding the aim button. So I think that the standard playstyle is move, stop, aim, fire, release, move, so on. So overall, this one's definitely a dud. Let's see what we get for the last one here. And here we've got a Ghoul Slayer's Combat Shotgun with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and faster movement speed while aiming. So the Ghoul Slayer's effect is probably one of the lesser useful of the Slayer's effects, because even though you are likely to face ghouls on at least a somewhat regular basis for most players, you're probably not facing them as often as you used to since they made Westech instanced. And even if you are, they're generally squishy enough that it's probably not worth keeping a weapon around specifically to deal with ghouls. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage it's a great effect, and you can definitely get some good benefit from it with this weapon. In fact, with shotguns, even full health builds, and I forget the name of the perk, but it's the one that any hit has a chance to completely fill your crit meter. If you run that perk, even as a full health build, then you can likely crit almost every other shot with a shotgun. It's really luck dependent, so there could be times where you go, several shots without being able to crit, but you'll frequently be able to have one of those 8 pellets trigger that effect, fill up your crit meter, and be able to crit again. So if you're doing something like that, then that second star could be very powerful for you. But again, you probably would prefer it on a weapon that had a better first star. And then the faster movement speed while aiming, once again, worthless if you have speed demutation. And if you don't, it's doing what it says, but how often are you really doing that? So overall, this one's pretty much a dud as well. So we got a couple of interesting ones today. Nothing super exciting, definitely no god rolls or anything like that, but at least a couple of ones that were interesting to talk about. And we'll be back next week to try it again. So please remember, if you enjoyed my content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and it doesn't cost any money. And until next time, thank you for watching.